The chandelier above us glittered like 1,000 judging eyes, each crystal catching the light as if it wanted to burn this moment into eternity. Laughter rippled through the restaurant. Champagne flutes clinked. And then, he wheeled it out. Cake, 3 tiers, perfect frosting, gold trim, and scrawled across it in flawless cursive, "Finally free," gasps, applause. Phones raised to capture my humiliation like it was the night's entertainment. My husband, Daniel Hart, stood beside me, his grin sharpened like a blade. In his hand, divorce papers, neatly folded, already stamped and filed. He leaned close enough for me to smell the cologne I once thought smelled like love. "Consider this your graduation," he whispered, smug, his voice carrying just enough for the crowd to hear. "You've been a burden long enough." The room erupted, his sister cheering, his friends laughing, the cameras flashing like lightning. And me? I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that made Daniel's laughter falter for just a second. Because, while he thought he was handing me an ending, what I signed that night wasn't surrender. It was ignition. The spark that would collapse everything he'd stolen, everything he thought was his. The papers were his declaration of freedom. But for me, they were the key to a war he never saw coming. If you've ever felt dismissed, betrayed, or made to feel invisible, or maybe you've experienced the deepest loneliness, or that unbearable pain of losing those you love most, share it. Leave a comment, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because maybe the next story will remind you of your own strength. Rain tapped against my umbrella like a metronome, steady, rehearsed, too perfect to belong to chance. The cemetery was nearly empty, just a scattering of mourners who had long since gone home, leaving only the white roses laid in careful geometry on a granite headstone. Daniel Hart knelt there, his black suit pressed sharp even in the drizzle, one hand adjusting the roses as though he were conducting an orchestra of grief. He tilted his head just so, pausing with theatrical weight before speaking into the silence. "She would have been proud of what we built together," he said, projecting each syllable like he was at a board meeting. Not at his mother's grave. Almost laughed. What we built? There was no we. There had only ever been me, laboring in kitchens at 2 a.m., negotiating contracts by the blue glow of spreadsheets, hiding notebooks thick with menu innovations while he posed for magazine covers, stood a few steps back, the cold mist slipping down my neck, and let him perform. He wasn't grieving. He was auditioning. Even his sorrow was choreography. "Daniel," I said softly, my voice slicing through the drizzle. He turned, startled, as though he hadn't noticed me watching. His eyes flickered, then softened into the mask he wore for the world. "Amelia, I didn't expect you here." "Of course not." My tone was calm, but inside, the storm he'd unleashed at that party churned hotter than the rain falling around us. He thinks this scene is his. He thinks I'm just an extra in his drama. I stepped closer, heels sinking slightly into wet earth. "She may have been proud of you," I said, nodding toward the grave. Then I let my words sharpen. "But she would have admired me," his jaw flexed, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. He hated when I reminded him that without my work, there would be no empire to mourn, no fortune to flaunt. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, eyes darting back to the roses, resetting his posture like an actor finding his mark. "This was personal. Personal." The word stung. Had anything between us ever been personal? Our marriage had been strategy dressed as romance. My father had warned me, his voice gravelly in the oak-paneled study. Men like Daniel don't fall in love. They invest. Daniel straightened, fixing his tie even as raindrops soaked the silk. He glanced toward the car idling at the gate. Always. An exit plan. Always timing the moment to maximize effect. Even his grief had a schedule. I tightened my grip on the umbrella handle, holding his gaze. Perform as much as you want, Daniel. But remember this. Audiences change. He froze, confusion flickering in his eyes. I turned and walked toward the gates, heels clicking against wet stone, heart hammering not from sorrow but from clarity. He thinks this is his show. He has no idea I'm already writing the next act. Morning light spilled across the penthouse like molten gold, slipping through floor-to-ceiling windows and splashing against polished marble floors. Strangers might have called it paradise, a home perched high above Manhattan, the skyline stretched out like a crown. But to me, every shimmer felt like a prison bar. I padded barefoot across the cold stone, adjusting a vase of white orchids in the foyer. Their petals were flawless, imported weekly at a cost that could have fed an entire family. I arranged them anyway, because appearances mattered. Appearances had become my job. The mirror by the hallway caught me as I passed. My reflection stared back. Sleek hair, silk robe, painted smile. The woman looking back wasn't the Amelia who once burned her hands perfecting sauces in a cramped kitchen or fought for fair trade suppliers with stubborn conviction. She was curated, accessorized, a wife-shaped ornament, crafted to complement Daniel's brand. I closed my eyes and exhaled. When did I trade fire for glass? When did ambition become decoration? A sharp buzz pulled me back. Daniel's calendar. Reminder flashing on the kitchen tablet. Charity luncheon, 12:30. Smile, of course. Another stage. Another script where he'd take bows for innovations he couldn't even pronounce, while I stood at his side like set dressing. My stomach tightened. The walls gleamed. The chandelier above the dining table glittered like captured sunlight. But I had never felt smaller. Every detail I had once been proud of, the curated art, the flawless decor, now mocked me. This wasn't a home. It was a cage I had built with my own hands. I pressed my palm against the glass window, city sprawling beneath me. Somewhere out, there, life pulsed raw and unscripted. I used to belong to that world. I will again, because even in the most gilded cage, a bird remembers how to fly. The scent of aged leather and oak always clung to my father's study, as if time itself had soaked into the wood. I was 26 then, perched on the edge of his worn armchair, silk wedding gown spread around me like a cloud of promises. Richard. Caldwell held his crystal tumbler loosely, amber whiskey swirling with the weight of decades. His eyes, steel gray, sharp, fixed on me in that way that made me feel both loved and interrogated. "Amelia?" he said, voice low but firm. "Men, like Daniel, don't fall in love. They invest. And when the investment turns, they'll cut their losses without flinching." I remember bristling, cheeks hot with youthful certainty. He doesn't understand, I thought. Daniel is different. Daniel chose me. My father slid a folder across the desk. 70%, he said. "If he strays, if he files, you keep the empire you build. Promise me you'll sign this." I laughed then, nervous, dismissive. "Dad, it's insulting. Daniel isn't marrying me for money." Richard's jaw tightened. Men who smile the widest often hide the sharpest knives. Humor an old man, Amelia. I signed, or at least, I thought I had. The night before the wedding, I'd left the papers in my childhood room, intending one last read. By morning, the folder was gone. Vanished like it had never existed. Lawyers and their paperwork, Daniel had said with that dazzling laugh, knotting his tie before the mirror. "Don't worry, darling. We have forever to sort it out. Forever." Now, the word tasted like iron on my tongue. Standing in our penthouse years later, I replayed my father's warning, the folder that disappeared, the grin that covered a theft I hadn't yet recognized. It wasn't an accident. It was strategy. And I had walked straight into it, veil over my eyes. The kitchen at Heart and Flame never truly slept. Long after the last guest left and the final wineglass was polished, I would linger. My heels traded for flats, hair tied back, sleeves rolled. Steam curled from stock pots, the stainless steel counters reflected tired eyes, and in the silence, the real work began. While Daniel sipped scotch in some hotel bar, charming investors with stories he'd memorized but never lived, I was here, surrounded by notebooks filled with scribbled recipes, supplier contacts, and sketches of seasonal menus. Every idea that earned our empire praise, farm-to-table sourcing, signature wine pairings, the zero-waste protocols critics called visionary, had started in these notebooks. My handwriting, my hours, my sleepless nights. "Chef, taste this," I whispered once, sliding a spoon across to Marcus Reed, our head chef. He nodded thoughtfully, eyes lighting with approval. "That's the one," he said. "Customers will remember it." And they did. Reviewers called Daniel a culinary genius, hailing his bold flavors and pioneering spirit. Meanwhile, I stood at his side in photographs, a graceful accessory in cocktail dresses, credited as supportive wife. Inside, it was suffocating. I negotiated supplier contracts, demanding quality without letting margins collapse. I trained staff in service etiquette that had diners raving about our hospitality. I even handled customer feedback, turning complaints into innovations that kept critics returning. But when the New York Chronicle ran a glowing feature titled "Daniel Hart, the visionary behind Heart and Flame," my name was nowhere. I kept my smile polished, my voice soft. Maybe next time. Maybe he'll acknowledge me in the next interview. But next time never came. Instead, he would place his hand on my back at charity luncheons, parading me as proof of sophistication. "Amelia has been invaluable in helping me execute my concepts," he'd say condescendingly, as though I were a secretary, not the architect. I'd nod, smile, play my part. Meanwhile, in the quiet hours, I documented everything. Pages of recipes dated and signed, email threads proving my negotiations, drafts of staff training modules, stamped with my initials. My fingerprints were everywhere, though invisible to the world. I used to tell myself invisibility was temporary, that Daniel was simply waiting for the right moment to share credit. But each magazine spread, each award acceptance speech, each toast where he praised himself and brushed past me, the truth grew clearer. He never planned to share. The empire had always been mine. He'd simply stolen the spotlight and worn it like a tailored suit. And the cruel irony? While the world celebrated his brilliance, I had already begun building the arsenal that would one day reveal the truth. Every notebook, every signed date, every quiet witness in that kitchen, they were bricks in a fortress Daniel couldn't see. Not yet, but soon. The kitchen was dark, the kind of silence that only came after the last dishwasher left and the ovens cooled to a hush. I stayed behind, as I often did, surrounded by the smell of steel and citrus cleaner, notebooks stacked neatly on the prep table. My little kingdom of midnight hours, that's when I saw it, an iPad carelessly abandoned on the counter. Daniel's. He never went anywhere without it. It was his tether, his stage manager. The screen lit up as if summoned by my curiosity. One new message, then another. The name glowing at the top. Sienna Moore. At first, I told myself it was business. Marketing strategies, proposals, logistics. My chest tightened anyway. I tapped the screen. It unlocked easily. His arrogance hadn't even considered I might look. The conversation unfolded like a blade sliding into my ribs. Sienna. Can't wait for this weekend. Finally, no more hiding. Daniel. She won't suspect a thing. By summer, she'll be out of the picture. Sienna. Naive little wife. I almost pity her. Daniel. Don't. She's already signed her protection away. The prenup is gone. She has nothing. My breath caught. The iPad wobbled in my hands, and for a second I thought I might drop it. Naive little wife. That's what I was to him. To them. I scrolled further, heart pounding, palms slick. Hotel reservations under fake conferences. Photos from wine bars I'd never seen. Sienna's lipstick on his glass. Plans, strategies. Timing the divorce like it was a business deal. Every message was a confession, each line a nail in the coffin of the life I thought I had. My hands trembled, but my mind sharpened with an eerie calm. The betrayal burned, yes, but beneath the fire was something colder. Clarity. I whispered into the empty kitchen, voice steady despite the storm inside me. So this is who you really are. For a moment, the steel counters reflected not the wife he dismissed, but the strategist he underestimated. The irony struck me cruelly. He thought the prenup had vanished. He thought I had no shield, no weapon. But I remembered every word of my father's warning, every signature line that had once existed. And if those papers had disappeared once, perhaps they had never disappeared, at all. The iPad buzzed again in my hand. Sienna. Just imagine. Our empire, ours alone. Daniel. She was only ever an accessory, a stepping stone. The words blurred, my vision hot with tears that refused to fall. I set the iPad down carefully, as if it were loaded with dynamite. In truth, it was. Evidence. Damning and indisputable. I pressed both hands against the cold countertop, forcing air into my lungs. Cry later. Not now. This isn't the end, it's the spark. The kitchen, once my cage, felt transformed. Every shadow hummed with purpose. Every notebook in my office was proof. Every recipe, every email, every witness could become ammunition. I had discovered his betrayal glowing in pixels, but I knew this was only smoke. Somewhere deeper, hidden away, the fire waited. The safe, the documents, the truth he thought buried, and I was ready to strike the match. The study smelled of leather and arrogance. Daniel's trophies lined the shelves, plaques from industry magazines, glossy photographs where his smile was as polished as the gold frames around them. To anyone else, it was a shrine to success. To me, it was camouflage. The iPad messages still burned in my mind as I slid open the mahogany desk drawers. At first, only order, folders labeled in his precise handwriting, bank statements stacked like soldiers, contracts aligned edge to edge. Daniel was meticulous, obsessed with appearances, even here. But meticulous men make mistakes. When one drawer caught on something, I tugged harder. The wood stuttered, revealing a thin seam where there shouldn't have been one. A false panel. My pulse spiked. I pressed against it until it gave way with a soft click. Inside lay the truth. The original prenuptial agreement, untouched, unsigned by me. Daniel's flourish alone marking every page. My name was missing, my protection intact, exactly as I remembered on the morning of our wedding. I traced the ink with my finger, a strange shiver running through me. He had thought the document gone forever. In reality, he had hidden it away, convinced that secrecy equaled erasure. Beside it, manila folders, thick with betrayal. Cayman Island account statements, property investments listed solely under his name, and, most damning, a formal proposal to sell Heart and Flame to a hotel conglomerate. The restaurant empire I had built in sleepless nights, penciled margins, and fire-scorched hands was a bargaining chip in his exit strategy. I sat back in his leather chair, the evidence spread across the desk like a crime scene. This isn't just infidelity. It's theft. It's premeditated destruction. I snapped photos of every page, the shutter of my phone sharp against the silence. Each click was a nail in the coffin of the empire Daniel believed was his. My hands steadied as the storm, Inside me crystallized into something harder. I wasn't the naive wife anymore. I was the architect of his downfall. Forever, he had said that morning, adjusting his tie. Forever had lasted just long enough for me to find the key to his undoing. I replaced everything exactly where I'd found it, sliding the false panel back into place, smoothing the folders like nothing had been touched. He would never suspect. Not yet. When I closed the desk, the trophies on the shelves seemed different, hollow, mocking. Every award was a monument to a lie, a performance he had perfected. But soon, the curtain would fall. I whispered into the empty room, tasting the promise in my own voice. You should have left the safe locked, Daniel. You should have left me invisible. The shadows swallowed my words, but I knew the truth had already shifted the ground beneath us. I wasn't just holding secrets. I was holding the fuse. The kitchen smelled of garlic and charred rosemary, even after hours. The low hum of the walk-in fridge filled the silence, punctuated by the clink of Marcus Reed's knife against the cutting board. He was still there, sleeves rolled, weathered, hands working with the patience of someone who found comfort in repetition. I hesitated at the doorway, clutching my phone, its gallery now filled with Daniel's betrayals. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't sure if my legs could carry the weight of what I had just uncovered. Marcus looked up, reading me instantly with those steady eyes. He set the knife down and wiped his hands on a towel. You found something, he said. Not a question, but an acknowledgement. I nodded, sliding onto a stool at the prep table. Everything. The prenup, offshore accounts, plans to sell Heart and Flame. He was never building with me. He was building without me. Marcus's jaw tightened. He reached under a stack of invoices and pulled out a worn leather binder. Then it's time you saw this. Inside were pages of notes, dates, times, transcripts, instances where Daniel overrode menu decisions, only for them to fail. Notes where staff quietly ignored his directives to follow mine instead. Logs of his absences, contradictions, mistakes. My throat tightened. You've been keeping records? Marcus gave a small shrug. We've been protecting this place. The team knows who really runs it. We couldn't stop him from taking the credit, but we could make sure there was a paper trail. The door swung open. Claire Nguyen, our sommelier, stepped in with a laptop, tucked under her arm. Her dark eyes flicked between us. He's sloppy with wine, she said bluntly. I started logging his recommendations. Every time he confused a Syrah with a Shiraz, every time he picked by price instead of profile. She powered up the screen, rows of spreadsheets glowing against the dim light. If he ever tries to claim expertise, I can prove otherwise. I stared at them. Marcus with his quiet loyalty, Claire with her sharp efficiency, and for the first time since the divorce party, I didn't feel alone. You've both been waiting. My voice cracked. Marcus leaned forward, voice steady. We knew this day would come. The staff respects you, Amelia, not him. You built this empire brick by brick, and we've been keeping receipts while he's been playing dress-up. Claire smiled faintly, though her eyes burned with conviction. We're with you. Whatever you need. Tears stung at the corners of my eyes. But they didn't fall. The hollow ache of betrayal was still there, but now it was tempered with something else. Solidarity. A reminder that my fight wasn't mine alone. I closed the binder and laptop gently, as if sealing an unspoken pact. Then it's time, I said, the steel returning to my voice. Daniel thinks I'm cornered, but he's about to find out what happens when shadows start keeping score. The hum of the fridge seemed to swell, vibrating through the stainless steel counters like a drumbeat. I wasn't just a wife discarded at a party. I was a general with an army waiting in the wings. And now, the war was no longer mine alone. Robert Jenkins' office smelled faintly of ink and old paper, the kind of scent that made you trust the weight of documents more than the promises of men. Stacks of legal tomes loomed around us, their spines whispering precedent and protection. Robert adjusted his glasses, scanning the prenup I'd slid across his desk. His brows lifted, then arched higher with each page. "This," he said slowly, tapping the signature line where Daniel's name stood alone, "is ironclad. If he files, if he strays, you don't just keep part of the empire. You inherit its bones." My pulse steadied. Finally, proof that my father's warning had not been paranoia, it had been prophecy. But a prenup was only the foundation. I wanted walls. I wanted a fortress no storm could breach. "Then we go further," I said, leaning forward. "Recipes, menus, supplier protocols, staff training systems, everything I created. It needs to be documented, protected under my name." Robert's pen scratched across his notepad like a sword carving steel. "Intellectual property filings, trademarks, licensing agreements, each one another brick in your wall. By the time he realizes, the ground beneath him will already belong to you." I thought of Daniel on magazine covers, smiling like a man who owned an empire. He had been standing on foundations poured from my sleepless nights, my calloused hands, my notebooks inked with fire. "Do it," I said. My voice didn't tremble. For months, while Daniel rehearsed his charm in boardrooms, I sat under fluorescent lights with Robert, signing, filing, notarizing. Every signature was a declaration of independence. Every stamped seal, another lock, on the gates. And each time Robert slid a folder across the table, I felt less like a wife scorned, and more like a strategist sharpening her blade. He thinks betrayal will break me. He has no idea it's building me. The ballroom in New Orleans glowed like a gilded theater, gold drapes, chandeliers throwing shards of light across champagne glasses. A jazz trio played in the corner, their music jaunty, cruelly out of step with the storm rising in my chest. I had been invited, of course. A cream-colored envelope with embossed lettering. An evening of celebration. Daniel never said what we were celebrating. He didn't need to. The moment I walked in, I felt it. Eyes followed me, too eager, too knowing. Rebecca, his sister, hugged. Me with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "This will be a night to remember, Amelia," she whispered, her tone laced with venom. And then I saw her, Sienna Moore, radiant in crimson silk, standing by the bar like she already owned the room. Like she already owned him. The smirk she gave me said everything. At 8:30 sharp, the lights dimmed. Waiters wheeled out a 3-tier cake, gleaming under the spotlights. Across its flawless white frosting, in elegant cursive, "Finally free." Laughter rippled, cruel and rehearsed. Glasses clinked. Daniel stepped forward, divorce papers in hand, wrapped in gold ribbon like a gift. "Amelia, darling," he said, voice carrying, smug as ever. "Consider this your graduation present." The crowd cheered. Phones flashed. My humiliation had an audience. But instead of breaking, I smiled. Slowly, deliberately. I took the pen from his hand, signed with a flourish, and handed the papers back. My voice carried through the sudden hush. "There. Consider it done." For a heartbeat, confusion flickered across his face. He had expected tears, collapse, rage. Not calm. Not steel. Because Daniel thought this was his grand finale. But tonight, he hadn't staged my downfall. He had just signed the opening act of his own destruction. The sun crawled over the New Orleans skyline, pale and indifferent. In the penthouse suite Daniel had rented for his victory weekend, crystal glasses from last night's celebration still littered the counter. Sienna's perfume lingered, in the air, sweet and suffocating. At 9 sharp, Daniel's world began to crack. It started with his phone. A buzz, then another. A cascade of notifications. He muttered, half asleep. Probably congratulations. But as he scrolled, his face drained of color. Bank of America. Account access suspended. Morgan Stanley. Funds frozen pending review. Cayman Holdings. Transaction denied. What the hell? He sat upright, fingers jabbing at the screen. Call after call. The same answer, polite but final. Per the prenuptial agreement, sir. The words echoed like a gunshot. He slammed the phone down, pacing in silk pajamas, voice rising with each frantic call. This is a mistake. The prenup doesn't exist. She never signed it. On the other end, cool voices replied, It exists. With your signature. That's binding. By 9:15, his investment accounts were inaccessible. By 9:30, deeds to 3 properties had transferred. By 9:45, legal notices were being couriered to the hotel, his empire crumbling faster than his trembling hands could dial. Sienna emerged from the bedroom, robe slipping from her shoulder. What's going on? Daniel spun on her, wild-eyed. She set me up. Everything's gone. The restaurants, the accounts, everything. Sienna's brows furrowed, then smoothed into something colder. You told me she had nothing. That she signed it away. She did, he insisted, voice breaking. I made sure. But the words faltered. Because deep down he knew. He hadn't erased the prenup. He had hidden it, and now that oversight was the blade at his throat. Sienna's lips curled in something like pity, or maybe disgust. She grabbed her purse. I don't stay with losers, Daniel. The door clicked shut behind her. By 10:01 a.m., Daniel was alone. Imagined it all as I sat at my own kitchen table hundreds of miles away, sipping coffee. My phone buzzed with confirmation messages from Robert. Accounts secured. Properties transferred. Trademark filings complete. Every line was a drumbeat. Every buzz was justice. I pictured Daniel's hands shaking, his tie loosened, his smile finally stripped away. The man who thought humiliation was my ending was now choking on his own downfall. And I whispered into my empty kitchen, voice calm and steady. You wanted me invisible, Daniel. But now, everyone can see exactly who built this empire, and exactly who just lost it. The dining room of Heart and Flame gleamed under soft afternoon light, tables already set for the evening service. Fresh linen, polished cutlery, wine glasses aligned with geometric precision. This was my temple, one I had built with calloused hands and relentless vision. The front door opened. Daniel stepped inside. No entourage this time, no cameras, no champagne toasts. Just a man unraveling, his once perfect posture weighed down by panic. His suit was wrinkled, tie loose, as if even his clothing had given up pretending. He scanned the room, eyes flaring when they found me seated at the corner table. Amelia, he said, voice tight, brittle. We need to talk, privately. I didn't move. We are talking. He approached, lowering his voice as though the walls might listen. This situation is a misunderstanding. Lawyers can be overzealous. Let's fix this before it gets out of hand. I tilted my head, studying him like a specimen under glass. Out of hand? Daniel, it's already in hand, mine. His jaw clenched. You can't do this. This restaurant is my life. My dream. I stood, letting the silence stretch until the air itself seemed to weigh on him. Your dream? I walked toward him slowly, heels clicking against marble. I was here at 2 a.m., perfecting sauces while you were shaking hands at cocktail bars. I trained staff, negotiated contracts, designed menus. You played the visionary, but it was my fingerprints on every brick of this empire. Daniel's voice cracked. That's not true. From the kitchen door, Marcus Reed emerged, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Behind him, Claire appeared, holding a binder. They didn't need to speak. Their presence was testimony enough. I slid an envelope across the table toward Daniel. You like contracts, don't you? Here's one more. His fingers trembled as he opened it. His eyes darted across the page, face draining of color. Assistant manager? Reporting to Marcus? Yes, I said evenly. Consider it a mercy. At least you'll learn how a real restaurant is run. For a moment, rage flickered in his eyes, the mask of charm cracking into something raw and ugly. But then, defeat. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining as the truth suffocated him. You can't humiliate me like this, he whispered. I leaned close, voice cold as steel. Humiliation is public. This, Daniel, is private justice. You handed me the stage, remember? You just never imagined I'd rewrite the play. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of refrigerators in the back. Daniel clutched the contract, the final symbol of his fall. I turned, walking toward the kitchen where my staff waited. Behind me, the man who once believed he owned everything now held a piece of paper that told him otherwise. For the first time in years, I felt light, powerful, free. And as the kitchen doors swung open around me, I knew the next act wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. 6 months later, Heart and Flame felt reborn. The dining room buzzed not with hollow performances, but with genuine energy. Marcus's new seasonal menu had food critics writing in awe. Claire's wine program had been featured in Wine Enthusiast. Staff who once worked in Daniel's shadow now held titles and respect. Every corner of the restaurant hummed with pride. And me? I no longer hid behind notebooks or cocktail smiles. I was visible, present. The woman behind the empire finally stood at its front. The news broke one morning in spring. Heart and Flame nominated for a James Beard Award for Innovation in Sustainable Dining. My name, not Daniel's, was printed in bold across the article. I read it twice, then let myself cry. Not out of sorrow, but relief, recognition, vindication. That evening, as I stood on stage in a midnight blue gown, lights warming my skin, the applause washed over me like a tide I had been swimming toward for years. I glanced at Marcus and Claire in the audience, their proud smiles steadying me. This was our victory. Meanwhile, Daniel wasn't in the crowd. He was back at the restaurant, wearing a plain black uniform, clearing tables under Marcus's supervision. I'd seen him once through the security feed, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. For the first time in his life, he was working, truly working, not performing. And though it was justice, it wasn't cruelty. It was lesson, because revenge wasn't my endgame. Revelation was, I didn't need to destroy him. The truth had done that for me. What mattered was what rose in the aftermath, a culture of honesty, of credit given where it was earned, of strength no longer hidden in the shadows. Looking back, I realized, the divorce party that was meant to break me became my liberation. The prenup Daniel mocked became my shield. The staff he dismissed became my army. The fortress of law I built in silence became my weapon. And through it all, I learned something I need you, the one listening now, to hear. Never let anyone narrate your worth for you. Your work, your voice, your vision. Those are yours. Protect them. Document them. Believe in them, even when others try to erase your name. Being underestimated is not the same as being worthless. In fact, it's the greatest cover you'll ever be given. Because while they look away, you can build. And one day, when the curtain rises, the world will see what you've always known. You were the architect all along. So if you've ever been dismissed, betrayed, or silenced, remember Amelia Hart. Remember that silence is not surrender, invisibility is not absence, and patience can be the sharpest form of power. When I signed those divorce papers, Daniel thought he'd staged my downfall. But what I signed wasn't an ending. It was the opening act.